Aloha and welcome to ThinkTech Hawaii's newest show, Reaching Out. My name is Nins Faleafine and I'm your host. This show is going to be on conversations around the social side of the internet. And today, my first guest of the show is a longtime friend. He is the executive director of Hawaii Open Data. He has more than 30 years experience in the Hawaii technology and communication sectors. He is an instructor at the University of Hawaii. His passions are this insatiable curiosity and drive for communication, and he is one of several people that I credit or blame for my affinity for everything social on the internet. Please welcome Burt Lum.
Well, thanks.
How's it?
How's it? Good, good.
Good to see you, Burt, and thank you very much again for being a part of this show. We've done other shows together, and so this should be fun.
Yeah.
And I just want to dive right in. The topic of our show today is WTF social media. It's been around for a long time, and yet a lot of people and a lot of organizations, governments, they still have a hard time wrapping their minds around what is social media. And so I want us to take it back, history. Let's not go to the 60s when the military was using the internet. Let's fast forward a bit when it became commercial use. The mid-90s when I think you were like 15 and I was a toddler.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think I was around 15.
Yeah.
You know, the first time that I actually started to see the potential of the web was when the folks over at Honolulu Community College was actually playing around with HTML and creating websites. And back in '94, I was doing some work with the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana, and we actually created a website for Kaho'olawe Island. And I think back in '94, that was probably the first island that had its own website.
So way before Oahu.
Yeah, way
Big
before
Island,
Oahu.
yeah. So Kaho'olawe. So
Yeah,
they have the first bragging rights. If it were populated, those people would have been the first
and
on
you know,
internet.
it's interesting because Honolulu Community College, you know, there were a bunch of folks that were actually working on some of the protocols for the early web, and looking at the potential for sharing all of this information. You know, whether it be images or text or you know, just about any kind of digital medium you could share over this newfangled thing called the web, which rode on top of the internet. You know, back in the mid-90s, that was like, wow, this is like a glimpse of the future.
So how long did it take you from introduction to deciding, like, I'm going to plug into this new medium?
Well, you know, I think I was kind of plugged in back in the high school days, because back in high school, which is too far back for anybody to really remember. I'll give people a sense of how far back this was. This was back when Iolani only had guys.
Yeah, it was an all-boys school.
And back then, you know, we had a very kind of progressive math teacher. Actually, he was a math teacher, but he also taught computer science, and his name is Glenn Young. I think he's still there. And he taught us a language, a programming language called Fortran. And even back then, I was thinking, wow, you know, this is kind of interesting because it's almost like a foreign language. But you create this program that does something. So you could give it some instructions to perhaps, let's say, calculate pi to the, you know, thousandth decimal point, and then it'll do it. And if you coded it correctly, you know, you'd get it all printed up. And back then, you know, working on the computer was really kind of a very new thing. And to me, that's probably my first real sort of introduction about getting connected to this arena that allowed you to leverage computing devices.
And if I recall correctly, your nickname in high school was Fortran.
That's
what I heard. That's what I heard through the coconut wireless.
To admit that, yeah, I was.
Yeah, that you were so intrigued then. Do you remember what device you folks were using?
Yeah, so you know, when you talk about devices, the program was really run on a mainframe computer.
Okay.
And in order for you to actually type the code, you'd have to type it out on punch cards. So there was actually...
You're showing your age, bro.
Yeah, in more ways than one. But you actually have to go to a card punch device. It's almost like a modified typewriter, but it actually punches out little holes in a card. And you'd go in and, you know, pre-write your program out, go in and type it up. It'll generate the cards, and then you put it into a card reader, and then the reader would then basically be the input device into the mainframe, and the mainframe would compile your program and run it.
And then it came up on the screen for
No,
you?
no screen.
No screen?
So the thing would actually print your results on paper. Okay, so at that time there
So
was
we're really getting a history lesson
really
here.
no monitor per se, right?
Okay.
We had to basically do it on paper, and then it would print out your results on paper.
So when do you think the internet really got social? A lot of people think that social media is this new technology, and really if they knew the history of it, people were already being social. Like I said, the military used it back in the 60s to communicate with different departments as well as different countries, and yet people think it's such a new technology. So let's go back and talk about some of the fun tools that we explored on. And I know I shared with you, I remember ICQ or IRCs, right, using ICQ, and I remember the days of Yahoo Chat, except you just shared with me that there was something even before that.
Well, okay, so when we first started to look at the web and creating websites and creating web pages and putting up your images and animated GIFs and text and all that, for the most part, it was kind of a one-way communications, right? You'd put it up, it'd almost be like a electronic brochure for the most part, right? So what was really kind of intriguing to me was if you were to put up something and somebody were to read it, but then you would get some feedback by somebody that was on the net somewhere. And the first introduction to that was, via some of these chat applications. There were things like, ICQ and, sort of the IRC channels. And one that was really intriguing to me way back when was something called the Palace. And the Palace, I like the Palace because ICQ and the IRC, sort of chat environments were kind of cool because there were text interfaces and you could text, but people were really advanced in terms of how they would perhaps use control characters and various kinds of ways of transmitting their code. What I gravitated more toward was the sort of graphic interface. And Palace was an environment where you could create your own rooms. And to imagine this, so if you had a photograph and you wanted to use that as a backdrop to your room, you could simply take that photograph, put it into the program, and that became your room. And then when you would enter the room, you would have a little avatar, and you could select the avatar that you want. You could pull a little GIF from somewhere, or create your own. And back then, my sort of name on the Palace was Quark, QUARQ _HI, Quark HI. And the reason I kind of chose that, and it was kind of obscure, but I used to enjoy watching Deep Space Nine.
Okay.
And of course, all the Ferengi, and there was a guy named Quark, and that was kind of like a cool character. But then
so
also
you went from Fortran to Quark.
Yeah.
Quark HI.
So I kind of adopted that as my handle, and then I had a little avatar, and back then it was like this little samurai character that had a sword and a headband, and it's sort of how I kind of adopted this sort of digital Ronin, kind of name. But it was fun because it was an environment by which you could enter into a room and talk to other people that were in the room. And I happen to know some folks in Japan that actually ran a Palace, and what they were noted for was they actually translated the Palace manual into Japanese. But they were
to build a community.
Yeah, but they were well versed at English, so we could converse. And to me, sitting at home on your computer, running the Palace software, and actually talking to somebody in Japan, to me was like this is phenomenal.
So what year was this, Burt? Like
this was like the late 90s.
Late 90s, right? So way before what we know the social media, social web as today, it was already happening. And I was just joking with you, and when he mentioned that he remembers the Palace, I don't remember the Palace. However, I told him, "What is that? A brothel for geeks?" Right? And yes.
Well, so a sort of 3D version of that was maybe Second Life.
Yes.
Right, but and of course, we can talk about the whole history all the interactivity that could result from now being able to connect with everybody on the web.
Right. One of the things I noticed in doing my research with you is that you mentioned some of your different usernames, and then your little avatar, which was a samurai, and how you got digital Ronin. Except all your different avatars over the years, over the last decade, you look the same, man. It's like he doesn't age. He's just.
That's called Photoshop.
Yeah. Yeah, there he is there, up on the screen right now. And you look the same. You look the same when I first met you almost a decade ago, and in your photos here. What I want to talk about is kind of the art of the username. Because when I first got on the internet, I too used a different, I'm still not even using my real name. Neens is my online name. However, I used Infinity Pro, I did the HI, right? You know, just all the different names, you know. And so let's talk about that and the evolution of how we.
Well, I want to ask you first, you know, where did Neens come from?
So Neens is actually, my middle name is Penina. It's my Samoan name. And then it got shortened as we were growing up to Nina. And when my brother came along, my young brother came along, he just shortened it. He just started calling me Neens. And so when I purposely decided to get on the internet, when social networks first started getting popular, I did a Google search for Nina, and I was going to compete with the, you know, Nina Pinta Santa Maria, the Ninas around the world, and so I just went with Neens. And if you Google that, I pretty much own the first few pages of it. So just for personal branding, you know.
And I think that's the key. It's kind of all about personal branding. And over time, you know, when you first sort of get on, you pick a character and you know, sort of maybe have a affinity, in my case, you know, to, let's say, Star Trek or Deep Space Nine or whatever. But then as you start to realize that if you're going to be on the net and you're going to be perhaps promoting something, and that be your sort of personal brand, you have to start thinking about, well, what is it that you want to start to actually hang your hat on, right?
Right.
And what better to hang your hat on than your name, or perhaps a version of your name, like Neens.
Yes.
In my case, you know, I went from Cork, and then back in '98, I was asked to do a column in the Honolulu Advertiser, and you know, back then they were asking me, well, you know, you can pick whatever name you want for the column, and I think we all remember things like bookmarks, right?
Yes.
And the idea of bookmarking a website, and that's, you know, just sort of if you go to a website and you find that you're interested in it and you want to bookmark it, you can just bookmark it and it ends up in your bookmark, right?
It was part of the lingo.
So I thought it would be kind of cool if I took that and sort of modified it a little bit and called the show or the actual column Bite Marks, and that's BYTE, and to really bring it back to sort of the digital nature of all of the things that were now becoming more accessible to us, that being the internet and digital, let's say, resources or assets, and all of that is coming to us in digital format. And one of the fundamental building blocks of that digital world is, you know, the byte.
The byte.
Of course, you know, I guess I could have called it bit marks, but you know, it's too small, so I wanted to go with bite marks. And it had a little bit of a play on words too, because back then with the Advertiser, they actually wanted it to be a little bit edgy, right? And I think they had a precursor of a name prior to Bite Marks, and it was Bite Me, B-Y-T-E-M-E, Bite Me, right? And I thought, wow, Bite Me is a little bit too obvious, too much of an obvious play on that word, right? And so I went with Bite Marks, and even till today, you know, people will look at my name, and even I go to the bank, right, and I tell them, you know, this is put it into the Bite Marks account, and they look at me like, what is it, some sort of like vampire thing or what?
Right.
I thought BYTE.
I thought your evolution went from Fortran, so from computer programming to Deep Space Nine to vampires, and actually, it was just another techie kind of term. I think we have a screenshot of your old column that I dug up.
Oh, you dug it up?
Yeah, I dug it up, yes. And I just wanted to mention that I credited you as one of the people that I can blame and or credit for my affinity. I remember years ago I read a story about you, and you were live casting via your phone. And it was that article that got me reinterested because I wasn't interested in the internet. It took too long for me. I didn't have the patience. I had more fun going to the beach. Except when I read the article about you folks live casting and just live casting your commute from your home to your office downtown, I was very fascinated and curious about that. And so let's talk a little bit about that, like evolving from just a chat room, some graphics, to actually live casting your commute.
Yeah, okay. The column was sort of about internet culture, the technology, and one of the things that I was trying to do in our community was look at who was doing interesting things on the internet, whether it was creating a website or doing something sort of novel. And you got to think back in '98, what was kind of novel? Well, one of the things that I had encountered was a fellow, both a friend of ours,
Yes.
Ryan Ozawa, and he was he had started something called the Diarist. Okay, now I'll get to your story.
Yeah.
I mean, get the story about the live casting, but so the Diarist was a online journal that was a precursor to what we all refer to now as blogging.
Okay.
And he, he had a bunch of friends that contributed to the Diarist, but he was one of the people that was writing on a regular basis on the Diarist. And as a topic for the column, I thought I gotta interview this guy because, it's one thing to have a journal and a diary and to write about stuff that's private and you keep it in your desk drawer,
locked
or
away,
locked
so
away,
nobody sees it, right?
Your mom
Yes.
can't get at it.
Yes.
Or anything, right? So you put all your secrets in there. But here is somebody that was putting it all online, and I thought, wow, this is very intriguing because what sort of mental process would you go through to go through the extent of writing something and then now sharing it with everybody, right? Wow, this is kind of a new form of being public in my mind. So anyway, so I interviewed Ryan. This is probably back in like '99 or so, way back when, and we became friends and we started to collaborate and talk story, and of course he was as much, if not more so, addicted to the internet.
Yes,
Right?
and he will admit, I did invite Ryan onto the show, and he did have other commitments. Except if people are familiar with social media, especially in Hawaii, it is him.
Yeah.
Like he's almost like the godfather, even though he's younger than we are. He's like the godfather of the social community here in Hawaii.
I tell people, and they're always amazed at somebody who has the ability to lay claim to the handle at Hawaii,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Now, it's not just being the first one to lay claim to that, but it's also having the ability to maintain it. Because you can't just lay claim to it and not do anything with it. You gotta, maintain it.
Yes.
And he has laid claim to Hawaii across a number of different social media platforms. But to his credit, he has maintained it. Now, so one of the things that
So we're going to just take a break right now.
Okay.
And when we return, we're going to actually get into this live casting and this story that I saw that encouraged me to explore the social media. And then we're actually going to get into what are some of the benefits and drawbacks when we return from break. Aloha.
Hello, I'm Martin Despang, and I'm the host together with the one and only Ali Yamashita, and our show is called Urban Transcendence. And Urban Transcendence is about identifying where we have a unique situation of a vibrant city in one of the most beautiful natural environments. So how these two can coincide, sometimes conflict, how they could find reciprocity in the 21st century is what we're excited about. And we're planning on bringing in a diverse body of guests, both from the arts and the science and the established and the wise and the emerging generation. So hope you will join us. We'll always be on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Thank you.
Aloha and welcome back to Reaching Out. My name is Neens Faleafine, and we're here talking story and getting a history lesson on the social internet with Burt Lum. And just before we left for the break, I had talked to you about the one article. I think this was like '06. So he already gave us a history about how social the internet was in the mid to late '90s, right? And how you just discovered things that were happening online with people in Hawaii. And then we fast forward to this live casting. It's called live casting back then. Today it's called live streaming. And so let's talk a little bit
Sure.
about how that came.
So as I start to look at how people like to share some of the things that they do, having the ability to, let's say, video on and stream your video on the web became more and more easy to do, right? And so you had services like Ustream, even YouTube back then wasn't really live stream, but with something like Ustream, you could actually have a little camera, you could have a laptop, as long as you had a connection to the internet, right? And of course something to power your laptop and rig, you could actually take this camera and connect it to the Ustream service and live cast wherever you were. So
what were you sharing with the people?
Well, back then, I was telling you about Ryan and our sort of getting together and working on some of these online, let's say, blogging or diarists or journals, and then we thought, well, wouldn't it be kind of cool to actually set up a rig and have a camera and just go down to Ala Moana and do a live cast, and there was an example, okay, that was kind of at the forefront, and it was a guy named Justin.
I remember Justin.tv.
Right, and Justin TV, and he actually took it to the sort of the nth degree, where he actually strapped the camera onto him and was streaming for the most part 24/7. Now it lasted probably a good couple of months, because if you think about it, some of the technology is definitely available, but it's not at a point where it's easy to strap on and live with 24/7. And I think the only time that he would disconnect it was when he went to sleep. So we thought, just sort of as an experiment, what would it be like to strap a camera on, have your laptop, backpack, power supply, and then go down to Ala Moana. And we kind of did a stroll through Ala Moana and did the sort of live casting thing. But for me, and I think even for Ryan, we didn't do it to any extent close to what Justin did, and that was, I think, to the extreme. And even now, you fast forward to today, and you look at some of the technologies like Google Glass. I mean, even with Google Glass, I think for the most part, the technology is available, but from a lifestyle experimental standpoint, you can do it for a certain period of time. It becomes sort of really invasive after a certain point if you want to try to maintain this always on existence.
Right, and so when we talk about that, that's a great segue into what I want to talk about next, because talk about live casting and actually being on the internet. And one of the things, I talk to people about, if you want to be on the internet, if you want to be part of this community, one of the qualities you need to have is courage. Courage to live cast your life. Somebody like Justin, 24/7. You've got to have courage to be vulnerable and be able to share everything about yourself. And so what I want to get into is, if you could give me your definition of social media, and then from there, let's talk about some of the benefits of social media and then the drawbacks.
Well, so if you look at social media and you try to sort of define it, I mean, for me, it's kind of the interaction, the ability to be interactive on this platform called the internet. And in order for you to be interactive, you have to create or be a part of a community. So we all are part of various kinds of sort of real life, face-to-face kind of communities, whether it's, let's say, with a church or with a social group or with a sports team or whatever, right? You're sort of in a social group and you're interacting with them. Similarly, you could still have that same degree of interaction on the web with communities of interest that you form. And the web offers a number of ways that you can have that kind of communication, right? You could do it via chat, you could do it via video, you could do it via writing and blogging. You can do it in a number of different ways. Email, in fact, was probably one of the first social applications, right? So, when you start to look at some of the different ways of having that interaction, and now you start to ask yourself, okay, so to what degree am I comfortable about sharing stuff, right? And that's where people start to need to start thinking about how free and open do they want to be about their personal lives. I think for the most part, they may misinterpret the social part, maybe taking some of the face-to-face social interaction and thinking that, it's just sort of a slight modification of that. It's different, because in a face-to-face, I might share a secret with you.
Yes.
Right? Now,
and it's not to be put on Twitter
right.
or Facebook, right?
But I might tell you, Means, this is a secret. I want to just share it with you, and I trust that you keep it a secret. But even if you didn't keep it a secret, I would know that at least I attempted to kind of keep it close between you and me. That same kind of trust that you have on the net is very different, right? Because I may tell you something and you may honor that, but on the web, somebody might share it with somebody else that may not have that same trust.
Trust between you and that other person.
Right. So then the ability for them to repurpose, duplicate, send to all of their community of the content that you shared with them, whether it be text or audio or video or whatever, or pictures, now goes beyond just the communication that you had with that one person.
Right, so there's benefit and drawbacks in repurposing content, right? So we know the drawbacks of repurposing content, right? That's not what I said, right? Or that's not what I did.
Well, even with email, right? So let's say, as an example, somebody sends you an email, you get all worked up, and you feel like you owe this person a piece of your mind, right? and you wanna just lay it on them and lay it on them heavy, right? And you might compose this email, and in the heat of that passion, you might send it out. Now that email can easily be forwarded to somebody.
Yes.
It can easily be copied and pasted. It can easily be sent to others that you may have not even realized. And that's why there's I think a good warning that anything you put on the web, whether it's email or something that you might share privately on Facebook, you just got to be aware that could easily be cut and pasted and copied and sent to somebody else.
That's true. I'm laughing because I have been guilty of sending that email out, and then with the expectation and knowing that it could get forwarded. It could get forwarded. And so I've learned many a lesson too, just like in real life with relationships and communication. One of the benefits I want to talk to you about using social media is some projects that we're involved in with disaster management and with VOS. So would you like to share a little bit about that?
So if you start to look at social media and how a lot of our friends have sort of evolved using and realizing the value of this tool, a lot of them have chosen to, let's say, do sort of the promotional route, right? And there's no lack of
so once
events.
again, I'm guilty too.
Well, and that's cool. I mean, it could be a form of public relations. It could be a form of marketing. It can be a form of promotions, right? And so a lot of the friends of ours. I mean, I have to admit I have envy, because some of them get to go to places and experience let's say some far off places like Japan, and take all these cool foodie shots and hang out and have fun, and then really it's kind of a form of promotion.
So then that's a huge benefit of social media.
Right. So that's one avenue that you could go, and if you start to use the tools and really take it to the next level, even making a business out of it, right? Another area that I've kind of chosen to see whether we could sort of bring some value to is this area of let's say disaster preparedness and being helping our communities to be more resilient. And what we're finding is that there's a lot of interest on the part of disaster managers, because let's say, as an example, during a disaster, like we just had ESAL come through, and prior to that we had Flossie, and what the disaster management community often does is that they want to be very official about what it is that they release, which I totally agree with, right? But at the same time, there's all this activity that's going on in social media. So everybody is taking Instagram photos,
Yes.
they're doing their posts on Facebook, they're tweeting all kinds of stuff. And what they're finding is that there's, you know, if they're not providing the right information, people are going to fill that gap.
Yes, and that is a good point in communication and one of the benefits and the drawbacks at the same time that's happening. And so we're going to take our last commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to learn more about disaster preparedness and how it really, they can really benefit from social media right after this break. Aloha.
Aloha, my name is Daniel Luke, and this is my co-host, Ing. We'll be here every other Monday on New Media, The Bleeding Edge on ThinkTech, talking about the intersection of social media and the news. We'll cover technology, trends, and other fun stuff. Did I leave anything out?
Well, I'm here to keep you honest, so that's my job, to remind you of everything you've forgotten and to challenge you at every point.
Excellent. My wife tells me that I'm wrong about quite a lot.
Aloha and welcome back to Reaching Out. I'm your host, Nins Faleafine, and I've been talking story with Burt Lum, and I always enjoy listening to him because he has such a wealth of knowledge. And right now we're talking about the benefits and drawbacks of social media and how disaster preparedness can benefit from social media.
So the BOSS is something you brought up. BOSS stands for Virtual Operations Support Team, and it's a concept that was sort of born out of a lot of the disaster management folks across the country looking at ways that they could leverage social media to benefit some of the first responders. And so you and I, we both teach a social media class for the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, which is based here in Hawaii. And you know, we've gone out and talked to various groups, whether they be civil defense folks or fire or police in various counties across the country, right? And they're all trying to get a handle on what is this thing called social media, and how do we as first responders best utilize or best understand how to function in this new world of social media. So the BOSS is a volunteer group that we created for our community here in Hawaii. Now it could actually be applicable any place else, and there's BOSS communities all over the country. But the idea is really when an event occurs, like Isao as an example, we would get a call from civil defense, our state civil defense, now called the Hawaii Emergency Management Department, or Department of Emergency Management, and they would contact us and say, hey, can you activate the BOSS? And what that would mean is that we would put the call out to people on Facebook who have opted in to want to be monitors of social
So these
media.
are just regular users of social networks.
They're a little bit more than just regular users. I mean, they've been sort of vetted. Some of them are instructors like you and I. Some of them are ham radio, having ham radio experience. Some of them have gone through CERT, you know, like certified, the Community Emergency Response Team. There are various kind of like Red Cross. So they've gone through some training. So they're sort of vetted, right? They've shown interest in being interested in helping communities.
And I wanted to make that point because when there's so much information out there during an emergency, and you're the general public, you should really know who exactly to listen to, right? Whose information would have more weight than someone else. Right.
So the idea is you want to at least have the people that are part of the BOSS be trusted, trusted agents. And their role really is threefold. So the BOSS will do three things. They will look at the official tweets and try to help retweet official stuff that's coming out of the agencies like Department of Emergency Management or Civil Defense. They will also look for misinformation. So oftentimes on social media, I mean, humans will be humans. I mean, there will be people will be, you know, putting up fake stories or fake pictures or you know, create sort of
one of the huge drawbacks from social media, right, is this misinformation, especially during a natural disaster. We're talking about lives here.
And then the third thing would be to look for situations where there's sort of impending danger, or somebody is, let's say, there's a life at risk or in danger, there's a power outage, there's perhaps a fire occurring, something's happening. So those are basically the three things that we're observing. And what we try to do is look at, monitor hashtags, monitor just posts, and when we find something that is of interest, we would drop it into a shared document, and that document would be shared with the first responders, like the civil defense folks, the neighbor islands, and they can choose to act upon it or correlate that with whatever intel that they're receiving on their side. So it's all about sort of the situational awareness and making sure that they have a fairly broad understanding of what's going on out there. Because for the most part, right, they're all back in the EOC, sitting in the EOC.
They're supposed to be paying attention to what's happening with the weather, right? Rather than what's happening on Twitter.
If we're able to give them a sense of what's happening out in the field, then that's better tools upon which they can assess the situation.
Right, because a lot of times, and we spoke earlier about using social media to communicate, and while people, when they're evacuating their homes, for example, they're not necessarily going to pick up their television to watch it or their radio to listen. They're going to grab their phones, and that's how they're going to communicate. And so somebody has to be watching those channels, because that's how they might call 911, right? Tweet it, right? Or post it on Facebook.
Even the news agencies, right? A news agency isn't going to wait for an official press announcement, from the departments of emergency management, right? What they're going to do is they're going to monitor social media as well,
right?
And oftentimes they're pulling information. Now, whether they have successfully vetted it, and there's a balance, right, between first to print or first to publish or first to announce versus getting the story vetted.
Yes.
So there's always that first to publish, and oftentimes the news agencies are wrestling with that, but they want to be they are covering an event like ISAL, and for the time that they're on, and they're on continuously, right? And one of the things that they are challenged with is how do they continue to provide good information, right? How do they continue to feed that hunger for more information?
Because we want to know what's happening in the general public.
Like, what's next? They're looking
at
Twitter. They're looking at Facebook and social media.
And so we just talked about like a huge benefit using social media for disaster preparedness and especially monitoring on behalf of the Department of Emergency Management so that they can get an idea of what is happening in the different neighborhoods. And it's been vetted already by trusted resources. And so we've talked a lot about the history of the internet leading into what is social, talked about some benefits and drawbacks. And so what do you think is next?
What's next?
Everybody wants to know what's next, especially us marketers who want to stay ahead. Right? What do you think is next?
Well, it's tough to sort of tell the future when the future is it's happening right in front of us, right?
Right.
And what's interesting is that the devices that are coming out, the smartphones. Apple just announced their iPhone 6 and 6 Plus.
Yes.
I think there's a plethora of choices that you now have, right? And this gives people the ability to go out there and you can buy stuff, you can communicate, you can do whatever you want with this device, and this device probably has more power than the computers that I was messing around with.
Fortran.
Fortran,
right? Yes.
So,
or the Palace.
So
right.
the future is really going to start to, I think, encompass the smart device and then access to data that is becoming more and more available. And the area that I'm really kind of involved in is this open data arena.
Yeah, and that's what I want to get in because I see that the public's demand for more information, this data, is kind of where we're leading to, and rightfully so. So talk more about.
Well, that's going to be a whole other show. I wouldn't answer. But at a fundamental level, okay. So you have the internet as one layer of the platform, right? And then on top of that, you have the web, and on top of that, you have data. And now, as data becomes more and more available, and whether it's open government data, or we start to see things like the Internet of Things, where devices, sensors, infrastructure is now going to be communicating, their sort of current state.
Right, when the devices can track how many steps I've taken, my heart rate, from everything to tracking our pets.
Right. Or one sort of big Internet of Things example would be like the bus, right? The bus is communicating where it's located, how far it is from the bus stop, what time of arrival it's going to make, and that's nobody's really doing anything to generate that. It's part of the system. So you can sort of think of that as being part of that Internet of Things. And if you can, and we've actually done that, if you've got an application that takes that data and graphs it and presents it in a way that is easily understood by a user, and you can go and look at download the bus, right? And that shows you exactly that. It'll tell you where the bus is relative to the bus stop that you're going to wait at. These kinds of things I think are going to be the sort of the wave of the future. Whether it's wearable computing, like you're describing, where now the phones themselves have all these sensors on them, right?
Yes.
So I don't have to get a Fitbit necessarily to know how many steps I walked or how far I've run. And then there's going to be more wearables. There's going to be more ability to track your health. There's going to be more information that allows you to make better decisions about your life.
I've recently participated in a renewable energy pilot program with Kanu Hawaii with my water heater, and then with another program to just kind of monitor my electricity use with different smart sockets and outlets. And so more and more that data, right? Because then I can monitor and my usage, and then let my children know exactly what needs to be turned off.
So it's all about having the data, making the right decisions with that data. So is that data translated to a degree where you can have decisions made based on that data? So whether it's just data coming in about your electric usage, it might be just numbers in a row, rows and columns. But if you can put it by, let's say, time of day and by device, then you start to see what kinds of devices might be drawing more energy, what types of devices may be better used in the evening versus the daytime, based on the rates. So then you can use it for decision making. And I think that's going to be the future. Now, the other side of that is all the information that is being harvested by social media companies, whether it's Facebook or Google or Instagram or chat applications.
Snapchat,
All of that is also being used by those companies for advertising.
Yes.
I mean, you wonder why Google is making so much money. It's because they're selling ads. And if you look how fast they do this, if I go on and buy something from, let's say, Lands End or REI or wherever, right? As soon as I click, I'm interested in something, I see it on my Facebook page.
Yes.
I mean, it's remarkable.
I just saw a comment from one of our other friends, and I have intent on having him as a future guest, Bruce Fisher. He was just talking about how he's getting tired of the remarketing, and it's almost scary to the person that's not used to the web, the internet. If you visit Amazon and you don't buy a product, and you're on Facebook, those ads will show up. They'll know what you were looking at, that exact shirt or device that you were selling. And so yes, on the reverse side, it's used heavily by marketers, and those are my people.
So that's that's the balance, right? I mean, you've gotten all these applications for basically free, and in order for Facebook and Amazon and Google and all the folks that provide these very cool services to us, they got to make money somewhere,
right?
And using the data that they collect on us is part of that.
It's part of how they're making their money.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be an interesting world we enter in on, and we just have to be ready with eyes wide open, and of course be sort of mindful of what it is that you want to put out there.
Yeah.
Right? And we can talk.
That's a whole other show, right? That's a whole other show.
What it is that you want to personify once you get on the web.
Right. What is your brand? What kind of culture? I like to call it the culture. What kind of culture do you want to create using these different tools of communication? And so for myself, I just wanted to say, what's next? The open data, and then recap again that you were saying on the flip side for marketers and advertising, and it's you can look at it as benefits and drawbacks, whichever way. However, who should care? I often hear who cares about that social media? So in your mind, who should care?
I think we're in the 21st century, and we as participants in our community should all care, because it's just like any sort of new technology. Obviously, I'm sure people didn't like the phone when it first came out, right? Or maybe didn't like the computer when it first came out. But it's here to stay, and I think that it's best to get used to the idea, get used to how to use the tools, because the tools aren't going to go anywhere. Now, if you really choose to sort of shut yourself off from that, that's your choice.
Right.
But I think the benefits that you gain by not only building community, but also getting access to information that's out there, makes you more, I think, a not only global person, but more understanding of what's going on around the world. And what I think the internet is one of the few things that have helped to, in my mind, sort of reduce the ignorance and create an environment for better understanding of others across the country, across the world, in fact, globally.
I agree. It just creates for a better overall community. And so we are going to end our show today. I just want to thank you very much.
Thank you, Neen, for having me on.
I truly appreciate you. Thank you, all of you, for tuning in to ThinkTech Hawaii, reaching out. I look forward to connecting with all of you in the next episode. Aloha.